What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Two Stripes Podcast, the podcast that covers everything going on in the world of college football. This is episode 54 of the show. My name is Colton Denning. I am your host of the Two Stripes Podcast and want to thank you for listening to today's show. SoundCloud.com/TwoStripesPod or Two Stripes Podcast on Apple Podcasts is where you can find this episode and all the other episodes of the show. And make sure to check out my YouTube channel where you can also see the show and see some college football highlight tapes. I just put up a 30-minute video of Braxton Miller's best stuff at Ohio State. So if you need to kill some time at work or at home, check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Colton Denning. I'm super amped up because we are officially less than 2 months away from the start of the season. Fall camp should be kicking off within the next week or 2 weeks for everybody around the country, and that means that college football is here. So hope whoever your favorite team is, you make it through these next couple of weeks without any sort of suspensions or arrests. This is always the most interesting time of the year when it comes to off-field stuff. So hope you guys all make it through, and let's get through this together. But getting into today's show, this might be my most favorite one I've ever recorded. And this episode is about the Oklahoma Sooners. Talked with Jack Shields, who is the managing editor for CrimsonandCreamMachine.com. He is a returning guest. We talked OU before last season, and I've also spoken with him on the Hangout in the Holy Land podcast, previewing the Ohio State-Oklahoma game last year. So we've had a couple of chances to sit down and speak about OU the past few years, and I think this was the most interesting conversation because no Baker Mayfield, Lincoln Riley's second year. There is a transition going on at Oklahoma right now with where they're going to go with that program heading forward. They're recruiting at the highest clip I can remember. They seem to have a ton of positive forward momentum, and it just feels a little bit different than it did under Bob Stoops. I'm not saying he's a better coach than Stoops, but it just feels like Oklahoma is a little more fresh. It has a little more of a modern touch to them, I guess, in the overall sense of what they're doing as a program. So it was interesting to get his takes on where Lincoln Riley is leading that program, how the team stacks up this year, why they're still in the playoff hunt and still the class of the Big 12. They have a ton of talent. Rodney Anderson at running back was a guy we talked a little bit about who is one of my favorite players in the country. So this OU team, don't be fooled by Baker Mayfield leaving and thinking that, they're just going to fall to the wayside. They still have a ton of talent, and they're still going to be, I think, very much in the discussion for the college football playoff when we hit mid to late November. So interesting discussion with Jack. I think you're going to like it. Let's get right into it. Here is my Oklahoma preview with Jack Shields of CrimsonandCreamMachine.com. I am super excited to be joined by the third time, not on this show, but just third time talking overall by my buddy and the managing editor for CrimsonandCreamMachine.com, Jack Shields. Jack, we're making this an annual thing, man. Glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for inviting me, man. It's always fun.
Yeah, so we literally talked almost a year ago to the day. It was July 26, 2017, and that was for the Holy Land Pod, my Ohio State podcast. We were previewing the game between Ohio State and OU, which we don't got to get too much into on this one.
No mention of flags or anything like that?
No, it was a crazy year for OU, and even after Bob Stoops resigned, what was it like for you and I guess the rest of the OU fan base after everything that happened with the football team last season?
It's hard to put into words. It was so surreal at the time. There had been, rumors of him, being kind of close to maybe hanging it up, and that was around in the 2012, 2014 range. But then, he had that great season in 2015 and then did very well in 2016 as well. And so and the recruiting was his 17 class was really good. And so it was sort of surprising, but it kind of makes sense in hindsight because Tom Herman had sort of seized a bit of the recruiting momentum inside of the state of Texas. And since hiring the young face, Lincoln Riley, that has essentially flipped a little bit. Texas was on the verge of really, they had a great class last year anyway, but Oklahoma was on the verge of really losing a lot of recruits to Texas and stuff like that. And Oklahoma was able to win a lot of battles down the stretch. So, from a recruiting perspective, Oklahoma's star has shot up so much since then. So the move makes sense. I think Bob had all of that in mind at the time. He knew that it was the perfect time to hand it over to a guy like Lincoln Riley. And it's proven to be outstanding. Oklahoma, like I was said, it's like night and day from a recruiting standpoint. Oklahoma's really back to being on the upper echelon of one of the, as far as being a recruiting power. I think they're number 3 right now in the 24/7 rankings, and I think 3 as well in the Rivals rankings. So, it's been a while since Oklahoma's really been back to that point, and you can credit Lincoln Riley for getting them back to that point. So it's, it's bittersweet, not bittersweet, but it's, obviously I was sad to see Bob go, but I think he handed it over at the right time in hindsight.
I gotta be honest about the flag thing. I was one of the few Ohio State fans who was like, all right, I respect that. I can see, you come into Columbus and you win like that, you can stunt however you want. And I put that out on the Land Grant account, and people were not happy. But I love that about college football and college sports, and I thought that was a boss move. So OU fans, I'm right there with you. I liked it, even as an Ohio State fan.
See, in my experience seeing Ohio, I guess your experience is different, but from what I saw, close to half, maybe even more, seemed to be in the camp of being kind of okay with him doing that. I know, obviously there are plenty who were bitter about it, but, it seemed like a lot of Ohio State fans had the attitude of, hey, you know what? We beat them on their home field last year. He comes here and beats us on our home field this year. He's going to revel in it a little bit. If you don't want him to do that, don't lose on your home field. So, I think more of the criticism of Baker Mayfield came from a lot of, pearl clutching sports analysts and stuff like that.
Outside sources.
Yeah, outside sources and stuff like that. And also Kirk Herbstreit, who's obviously, as an Ohio State alum close to the situation, he wasn't too happy about it either. But from my experience, most Ohio State fans took it pretty well. Maybe I'm wrong.
I thought that there was a lot of people who took it well, but as a secret between you and me, and I guess the people listening to this, most of our fan base is trash. I'll go on record saying that.
I think most major fan bases are trash in their own way. I will say that.
Strong agree. But getting to that 2017 season, and that was one of the major moments, beating Ohio State early in the year, and I think that was kind of where everybody was like, okay, this OU team is for real. And 3 weeks later, and they had kind of gotten into a slump after that game where they played Baylor really close, strangely, and then they lost that game to Iowa State, but they rebound the rest of the season, win the Big 12, make the playoff, and then lose in what was an incredible and also heartbreaking game to Georgia in the semis of the playoffs. What do you think OU fans are going to remember about the 2017 Sooners?
2 primary things. 1, Baker Mayfield being a boss. And 2, Mike Stoops' defense losing it for Baker Mayfield. Those 2 things, essentially. And I honestly, I do think Oklahoma's defense is going to be a little bit better this year. But the fact that Oklahoma offense was prevented from bringing home a national championship, that was one of the most fun offenses to watch I've ever seen, that I've ever watched. And I think a lot of people agree with me on that. It was incredible. Lincoln Riley's, play calling throughout the year was fantastic. He had a few hiccups along the way, obviously, and a few in overtime, obviously, in that game. But, it's always going to sting. That Georgia loss, there have been a lot of, as you know, there have been a lot of heartbreaking Oklahoma losses in big situations since about 2000. Honestly, that one stings more than any of them, which is saying a lot.
I know as an Ohio State fan, the big talk about the playoff and the seeding last year was whether it was going to be them or Alabama. But do OU fans talk at all about how they probably should have been the number 1 seed? Because that, I think, upset me more than Ohio State not getting in, was Clemson getting that 1 seed. And I think if OU does get it, which I thought that they deserved, they probably do win the national championship.
Potentially. Yeah, I think there's a grain of truth to that, but that's not really you don't hear a lot of talk about that now, but at the time, I mean, there was a lot of talk about Clemson's loss sort of being whitewashed because Kelly Bryant got hurt, which I thought to an extent was, fair, but you shouldn't completely whitewash that result. And that's what it sort of seemed like the playoff committee was doing throughout the process, which irked a lot of Oklahoma fans, honestly. Because Oklahoma had a bunch of injuries in that Iowa State game as well. Obviously, you can't blame the loss on that, but it did upset some people that that Syracuse loss was sort of pushed under the rug. But would Oklahoma have beaten Alabama? I think maybe if Jalen Hurts had played the whole game, I think Oklahoma absolutely beats Alabama in that game. But you never know. I mean, maybe they throw in Tua. I mean, and maybe he lights up Oklahoma's secondary. Maybe Oklahoma doesn't defend the run very well. I think, Georgia's running game was a bit more dangerous with Sony Michel and Nick Chubb and Swift. But, Alabama obviously wasn't terrible running the ball last year. They were pretty damn good. So, they could have torched Oklahoma on the ground as well. So kind of hard to say, but if you put a gun to my head, I would say Oklahoma would have beaten Alabama in that game.
Switching to 2018, something interesting that you mentioned earlier was recruiting and kind of flipping that momentum that Tom Herman had when he initially got to Texas. And just from an outsider's view, OU has always had a lot of really great players. But to me, it feels like in the last 2 or 3 years and in some of the classes they have going forward with guys committed, it seems like just up and down the line, they have just a lot more guys that I look at and I'm like, okay, that's a dude. Like, they've always been able to develop, but whether it's a kid like Neville Gallimore, Marquise Brown, it feels like they are starting to really get these top-level guys and get them in bunches that maybe they hadn't been for a period of time.
Correct, and that's particularly true along the defensive line. Last year's, I believe the 2018 class, Oklahoma brought in a number of blue-chip guys along the front. So that's something that Oklahoma had been missing for a long time from a recruiting standpoint, and a lot of credit goes to Calvin Thibodeau and Ruffin McNeil for that. They have really done a great job recruiting, and they've done a great job with this current 2019 class as well. So, the days of Oklahoma not being able to get a push up front, they may be limited. I mean, I don't know if Oklahoma's going to be able to really dominate as far as the defensive front's concerned this year. I think they're at least a year away, but there's definitely reason for optimism for the future.
So looking at the offense, the big story, of course, is the quarterback battle, and it seems like a lot of the talk is about Kyler Murray replacing Baker Mayfield. In that, have there been any indications of how the offense is going to change schematically with Murray at quarterback, or Austin Kendall for that matter?
Well, it's going to be Murray. I mean, I don't blame Riley for letting it kind of drag out like this. I think he's trying to breed competition. I think that's the right move. But there's no reason to believe it's not going to be Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray's not coming back to play college football with $5 million in his pocket if there isn't some sort of understanding. At least that's how I see it. But, as far as the offense changing, I would expect them to run the ball a lot more. I would expect a lot of more designed quarterback runs. But, I think a lot of the stuff's going to be similar. I mean, but granted, Riley from year to year, and this goes back to his time at East Carolina, he's always done a great job of adjusting his offense to fit his personnel. Not completely giving it a facelift, obviously, but I mean, giving it the necessary tweaks to sort of, I guess, cover up the shortcomings and sort of highlight the strong suits of certain players, honestly. So, I don't think it's going to look completely different, but you will see some different wrinkles. I will say that. But it will definitely be Kyler Murray. I'm telling you that.
Well, and he's not going to have to do everything in that offense anyway, because
exactly.
Him and Lincoln Riley are going to have a lot of different pieces. But the first one I want to talk about is a bad man in running back Rodney Anderson. Last 8 games of 2017, he ran for almost 1,100 yards on 6.5 yards per carry, 11 touchdowns, torched Georgia in that playoff game. What makes him so special?
Well, his athleticism and size are two of the main things. This is perfect timing that you brought this up. About an hour ago, Oklahoma's strength and conditioning coach, Benny Wiley, posted a video on Twitter of Rodney Anderson, and this is what it says, and this is what it looks like, him doing a 60-inch box jump. 60 inches. It's nearly up to his chin. That's how high. It's incredible. He's an incredible athlete. You've seen him go airborne a few times in games. He's a tremendous athlete for how big he is. He's up near 220, 230. I mean, he's a very big kid. He's very solidly built. And he also has as much, straight line speed as any running back Oklahoma's had, honestly. I mean, you go back to that run against Kansas State. You go back to some of his other touchdown runs last year. I mean, people don't catch that guy from behind. I mean, he has great vision. He is very to the point. He hits holes really quickly. He doesn't, mess around very much. He's really the total package. He's a great receiver. I mean, he was statistically the best back in the country over, I believe, the last 8 games last season, and he showed it again against Georgia. I mean, he's definitely a dark horse Heisman candidate who probably shouldn't be a dark horse.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think if you're looking at Heisman odds, and I don't know what his are, he'd be worth throwing a couple bucks down on.
I might have to run out
make
to
some
Vegas.
legitimate money.
I might need to put some money down on that. That's an excuse to go to Vegas as well. So, I'm probably going to have to do that, honestly. I've got to check out those odds, but that seems like a decent opportunity for some winnings there.
Something I didn't realize until I really sat down and was doing prep for this was in the last decade or so, and even stretching back further than that, but just from the time that I can really remember watching college football and knowing the players cycle in and out, OU has had some great receivers. They've had Joaquin Iglesias, Ryan Broyles, Kenny Stills, Sterling Shepard, and most recently Dede Westbrook. And now a guy like Marquise Brown, where does he rank amongst that group and on the fun scale? Because he's a hell of an athlete.
Well, he's not someone who's going to go up and get a jump ball. I mean, even some of Oklahoma's shorter receivers that you mentioned, Ryan Broyles and Sterling Shepard, but 2 guys who are, under 6 feet tall, both of them were great at high-pointing footballs. That obviously isn't his strength. He's a short guy. He's a little guy. He's not very well built, but he is as fast as any receiver Oklahoma's had, excluding possibly Jeff Badette last year, the grad transfer from Kentucky. But he's someone who, once he gets to the combine, he's going to, turn some heads for sure. He's like, I think it was against Oklahoma State. The first touchdown that Baker Mayfield threw to him over the middle, there were multiple Oklahoma State players who had what would be considered an angle on him, and those angles evaporated within fractions of a second. I mean, he is an absolute burner. I mean, he like nothing, that we've seen from a marquee receiver at this school, honestly. He's fantastic. Very fun to watch.
We talked about the offense, maybe changing schematically with Kyler Murray in at quarterback instead of Baker Mayfield. Is there any sort of other major change when a guy like tight end / wide receiver / lab creation Mark Andrews departs and you have that middle of the threat sort of beast that he was not necessarily in that offense anymore? I know people are excited about Grant Calcaterra, but there's Brown on the outside. CeeDee Lamb's also a very good receiver. Do you think that passing game kind of changes it all too?
To a degree, maybe. I mean, I think they're going to make an even bigger concerted effort to get Kyler Murray out of the pocket, for vision purposes with him being 5'9". So the quicker releases you'll see on balls will probably come on screen passes and stuff like that, honestly. So, but as far as hitting people over the middle, I mean, you mentioned Calcaterra. I would not sleep on Grant Calcaterra, honestly. Like, he's not quite as tall as Mark Andrews, not quite as big, but he's equally athletic and maybe even more sure-handed, honestly. So he's someone who I think could have a pretty big statistical season. Something perhaps close to what Andrews had last year, honestly.
Yeah, 10 catches for Calcaterra in his freshman year, and 3 of those went for touchdowns. So definitely has some pedigree.
And they were impressive touchdowns as well. I mean, he was, contorting his body really well. I mean, those were highlight catches. He's a really great Like if NCAA football was still around, his spectacular catch rating would be about a 95. So that's that. I mean, he's probably better at that than Mark Andrews was, honestly. So there's that.
To wrap up talking about the offense, I think at this point there are way too many talented pieces and probably the best offensive mind in college football right now, and Lincoln Riley coordinating it to even think about them struggling. But what is something you think that could maybe just knock them back a step offensively?
One thing you could think of, and Oklahoma's offense last year, I think this season, productivity-wise, I think they're going to be fantastic. I think they'll probably come close to, like, as far as averaging total yards and stuff like that, they could come close to last year's team. What I'm wondering about is how well Kyler Murray will do when Oklahoma really needs a touchdown. Because last season, Oklahoma's defense was, obviously not very reliable. So there were situations in which Baker Mayfield went out there and simply needed to lead his team on a touchdown drive, like in the middle of games. I mean, they were in danger of really losing momentum in lots of critical junctures. And obviously also in late game situations. Baker was nails late in games as well. So, how will Kyler Murray do when push comes to shove, honestly, as far as that kind of stuff is concerned? I mean, he has, what is it, 4 starts under his belt at Texas A&M. And, obviously he was a very accomplished player at Allen High School, but, how is he going to do under pressure, honestly? I mean, this sounds like a, hot take, undisputed first take kind of like talking about like the clutch gene and all that crap. I usually don't subscribe to that, but, I feel like it really applies here. How well will he do in situations like that? So, I mean, if he turns out to, I don't have any reason to doubt him, but, Baker really did save this team's behind a lot of times last year. Will Kyler Murray be able to do the same thing? That's what I'm wondering.
All right, it's time. We got to talk about Mike Stoops.
There we go.
And you mentioned him earlier. And as a complete side note, I don't know how I got on this the other day. I've been like going down the rabbit hole on college football videos on YouTube. I know OU fans remember this, unfortunately. The 2014 game against Baylor in July.
That is honestly, people don't talk about that one enough. That is maybe one of the worst indictments of Mike Stoops, that game. I mean, people talk a lot about the Texas Tech game. People talk a lot about Bedlam last year, talk about Georgia. That Baylor game in 14 brought my ire more than any of them with those 15-yard cushions. I mean, that was insane.
I can see why, because it's one of the, like, I was talking to my brother about it, and he had never seen it before. And, we're not OU fans. He's a Texas fan. He's a Texas grad. And we both were just like, that's some of the most embarrassing stuff I've ever seen. So just a total side note. Didn't want to bring that back up for OU fans. But since we're talking about Mike Stoops, we kind of have to. One of the things about the defense last year, I think it was easy for people to look at that second half of the Georgia game, and you mentioned it, and to say, oh, this is just a classic Big 12 defense, and they folded, when they played a good teams. But there were times last year, the Ohio State game, where they looked really good, and other times where they didn't. Do you think the biggest thing for this defense this year is to just play more consistently?
To a degree, yeah. I mean, that'll be part of it. I mean, Mike Stoops has to push the right buttons as well. I mean, when he rushes 3 guys and gives quarterbacks 10 seconds to throw a football, good things don't happen. And that was happening way too often last year. So, and honestly, like I said, I do think Oklahoma's defense will be better this year. And I think a lot of that has to do with experience at linebacker with Kenneth Murray. I don't know if you watched too much of that Rose Bowl game or paid attention too much to the middle linebacker in that game, number 9. He was a true freshman last year. And he was constantly screwing up his gap assignments in that game against Georgia. That led to a lot of big plays for Georgia. So that, over the offseason, he was actually talking at Big 12 Media Day, and he has rewatched that Georgia game 128 times, according to him, as of last Monday. So, a lot of things I think are sort of going to take care of themselves. And one thing that I think will help things out is the fact that the talent is going up year by year with the recruiting. So a lot of Mike Stoops' trust issues, I think could sort of take care of themselves since he may have more trust in his personnel going forward. That's my hope, at least. So I think that could be the key to it, honestly. That's why there is a bit of reason for optimism this year on the defensive side of the ball. Do I think the defense will be dominant? No, but I don't think they're going to put OU in danger of losing as many games this year.
I'm glad you brought up Kenneth Murray because one of my favorite things that happens in college football, not just for the teams that I root for, but just all around the country, is that explosive growth that happens between freshman and sophomore seasons and sophomore and junior seasons. And it seems like almost all of that applies to almost all of OU's defense, between Kenneth Murray, between corners Parnell Motley and Trey Norwood, Neville Gallimore, and there's like 3 other tackles who were sophomores for them last year, Jordan Parker as well, and Kenneth Mann. It seems like a lot of these guys got really meaningful time, and they may have, like you said, Murray in the Rose Bowl kind of flubbed here and there, but after that full year and a full offseason, it seems like they're going to be ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the hope, honestly. It's they seem like they really have a chip on their shoulder after last year as well, at least after what they said at Big 12 Media Day. But, obviously that's something that you say, every year going into a season, like, oh, we have a chip on our shoulder. I really believe it this time after they had to listen to so much bad-mouthing of their unit last year. So, it sounds like they've really, really been putting in the work this offseason. And one other thing that I think will help is the new strength and conditioning coach, Benny Wiley. He's someone who's a bit more interactive with these guys. He's out there working out with them. He won, I think it was the first season of, or maybe the only season of some NBC reality show called The Strong. It was about bodybuilding and stuff like that. Like this dude is a Greek god. He's an Adonis. I don't know if Adonis was a Greek god. He may have been Roman. I don't know. But anyway, he is sculpted. I mean, he's someone who the players are really sort of gravitating to for a lot of reasons. And I think they've shown a lot of improvement body-wise and conditioning-wise because of this. I think that'll probably bring them along a lot this year. I think that'll be one of the big keys, in my opinion. So
yeah, I just Google imaged him, and the first picture is him shirtless squatting. So
yeah,
he is definitely a strength and conditioning coach. Is replacing Obo Okoronkwo the biggest question for this team? Because not only was he Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, he accounted for a lot of OU's big plays, according to our SB Nation colleague, Bill Connolly, whose previews everybody should check out. He accounted for 17% of all OU's Havoc plays, and I don't know what that ranks among other major schools in the country, but that seems like a lot.
Well, yeah, there is a lot of promise at that jack linebacker position, which is sort of a, the D-end linebacker hybrid, a pass rusher, essentially. But, Addison Gums is he's a true sophomore this year, a really highly ranked recruit out of California. He's someone who could step into that role. Mark Jackson's another possibility. Another possibility is Jakari Daly. But honestly, and that definitely is a concern, but the biggest concern I would say is at safety, losing Stephen Parker and Will Johnson. And they've had some injuries at that position as well with Chance Sylvie with an Achilles injury. So they're a little thin at safety. And they're going to be going with a 4-2-5 this year, probably going with Buki Radley-Hiles at the nickel. And there are a couple of options at the safety positions, but those spots still aren't really nailed down, so there's a little bit of uncertainty at the safety positions. That's honestly, that would be the biggest concern for me. And I'm not downplaying what's going on at the jack position, but the safety situation is what sort of worries me the most.
As you said earlier, it doesn't seem like the defense is going to be dominant, but it does feel like whatever steps that the offense may take back, even if they're small, that the defense can offset that with a little bit of improvement.
That's how I'm looking at it. Yeah, I really do think this team can win a Big 12 championship because of that, because I think the defense will improve, and I think the offense will be I think the offense has a chance to be very special, but I think at worst the offense will be very good. Maybe not as good as, what we saw last year with Baker Mayfield, but, returning as much talent along the offensive line as they are, that's really the key to it, honestly. I mean, teams that return a lot of really talented offensive linemen don't typically have a big drop-off to the next season. When a quarterback's given enough time to throw and when running backs have running lanes, I mean, things tend to go a bit more smoothly. So I'm really not too worried about the offense this year. I mean, Kyler Murray, I think he has a chance to really be special. And even if he's not overly spectacular, the offense will still be very good and the defense will be improved. So at least I think the defense will be improved. But yeah, I think the pick of them winning the Big 12 championship is about as safe as any conference pick this year, honestly.
I don't think that any other Power 5 team has a more fun schedule to start the season than OU. You look at it.
Fun's one way to look at it. Worrisome is another way to look at it.
Well, FAU week 1, let's break it down. FAU week 1, and you got the Lane Kiffin factor, obviously, but that Florida Atlantic team brings back a lot of talent too, and offensively they are super stacked. They have a really fun run game, and then instantly it goes to week 2 with UCLA, where I think everybody at this point is kind of just like, they're the mystery team. Nobody knows what they're going to look like. I've seen a lot of people talk about them like they're going to have a tough year. I tend to think that they're going to be really super bad, and that OU's kind of going to expose how rough year 1 is going to be with Chip Kelly, but that'll be a fun matchup between two historic teams. And then at Iowa State week 3, which for OU fans and that team is not only playing the team that beat you in the regular season last year, but going on the road to do it. So I think with no skin in the game, it's great for me. I don't know how it is for you guys.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm super excited for it.
No, I mean, it's definitely something you look forward to as a fan. I mean, they're not – I don't picture this team getting complacent for any of those early games. I mean, FAU, there's a chance that former OU quarterback Chris Robinson could be the starter in that game, someone who was dismissed from the team last summer and has been chirping a little bit, not too much, but a little bit between him and Baker Mayfield a few months ago, I believe. But anyway, it's that one is something that could potentially expose some holes in Oklahoma's defense. That's something that we're all a little worried about, but it's also a game that we're all very excited for. And as far as UCLA is concerned, I'm glad we're getting them very early in the season and in the early stages of Chip Kelly's tenure, because I think he's someone who could give someone like Mike Stoops a lot of trouble as well. So I'm not too worried about this year. So there's that. I think OU probably wins that one fairly comfortably. Iowa State, I think they're going to be good again this year. They've got Kyle Kempt back for he's a sixth-year senior, actually. He got he got a hardship red shirt, but and Devin Montgomery as well. Devin Montgomery is a beast. But, a pissed off OU is a dangerous OU. OU doesn't tend to lose those they don't tend to be upset by teams when they come into the game with a chip on their shoulder. So I'm not too worried about that one, honestly. I think OU could theoretically win that one somewhat handily just because I don't think they're going to overlook Iowa State. But after that, you've got Army, which they've actually been doing pretty well in recent years, so and they could be good again this year. But as far as athleticism is concerned, I'm really not too worried about them beating Oklahoma. I mean, I think they could give OU problems early with that option, but I don't think it's something that's going to be much of an issue come the third quarter. So,
as somebody who Ohio State played Army literally the week after that OU game last year, playing those option teams, it sucks.
Yeah, horrible.
It is no fun. They will hold on to the ball for 38 minutes. You'll still win by 35, but it is not enjoyable.
No, it's not.
Going back to that schedule real quick, I don't think there's any more of a Lane Kiffin thing than having a dismissed OU quarterback be your starter playing OU the first week of the season. Like, that is just the most Lane Kiffin thing ever.
I really, really hope it happens. I mean, that will add so much salt to this whole thing. I mean, in Kiffin, I mean, he's been a little bit quiet lately, but I'm expecting in the weeks leading up to this game for him to chirp a lot and sort of drum up publicity for his team. So I'm really looking forward to this one. Honestly, this is going to be fun.
So other notable stuff, of course, the Texas game October 6th, 2 weeks later at TCU, which seems like that'll probably be a game that could decide the Big 12 and at West Virginia to close it out. My final question for you is, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, What's the expectation for this Oklahoma team?
A conference championship and potentially a playoff berth. I don't think a national championship is. I think they could challenge for something like that, but I don't expect this year's team to do that. In 2019, 2020, once all these elite classes are in, I think they have a real shot at beating people like Alabama and Georgia. But I honestly don't think it'll happen this year. I think a good pick for Oklahoma would be an 11-1 regular season, a conference championship, and a probable berth in the playoff with, maybe a loss in the semifinal or final. That's at least what I predict. But, as far as expectations are concerned, I think it's the usual high expectation of winning a Big 12 championship.
Well, OU certainly always relevant, and they got the best you can hope for with that transition from a legend like Stoops into a guy like Lincoln Riley, who just fits that program, that culture. Recruiting's on the uptick, like we talked about, and it seems like we are in a we're in another golden era of OU football. So it should be a lot of fun watching them not only this year but also going forward. And if you want to keep up with anything happening in OU football and OU sports in general, be sure to visit crimsonandcreammachine.com. You can follow them on Twitter at @CCMachine. Check out all of Jack's work there, and you can follow him on Twitter at @JLarryShields. I got to be straight up honest, man. I'm not just kissing ass, and I've kissed a lot of ass on this episode. I think that this was my favorite episode to record, and I am very excited to see how OU does this year, especially now that Ohio State isn't playing them. I'm glad that's off the schedule.
Yeah, I mean, that was always really tense between Oklahoma and Ohio State. I was always really nervous heading into those games. I mean, I think it'll be a little more laid back this offseason, but, I mean, not offseason, but non-conference season. But, I mean, like you said, I mean, it's those early games are all kind of intriguing. So, it's a little different offseason this year. It's not really you don't really get a big name opponent. Next year they'll be traveling to UCLA where it'll be, probably a marquee matchup. But it'll be nice not to have to play Ohio State again. As fun as it was for me last year, I've got to admit.
Hey, I totally accept the L that came with that one. You guys deserved it. But I enjoyed this episode. Be sure to check out crimsonandcreammachine.com, and we're going to have to talk again for episode number 4 down the road.
Sounds good, man.
Dogs crowd the line. This is Anderson, who breaks free. Rodney Anderson in the clear, headed for the end zone.
Thanks again to Jack for joining the show and previewing Oklahoma. That was a lot of fun. Looking forward to watching how they play this season. That week 1 game, man, against FAU. Going to be a lot of fun. I think, as Jack said, we'll hear some, if not trash talk, then some headline-worthy statements from Lane Kiffin leading up to that. So I think that game with FAU's offense and Oklahoma without their best defensive player from last year should be interesting. I think that could be a game where FAU scores some points. I don't expect that they'll win, but I think it'll be a lot of fun. Another thing that I kind of alluded to at the end, but I don't think we really talked about very much, was just how fortunate Oklahoma was to have a guy like Lincoln Riley step up and be this good in lieu of a legend like Bob Stoops deciding to hang it up. Because as we've seen around the country at some of these bigger schools, it's not always the easiest transition between going from a guy like Bob Stoops to whatever that next head coach is. And a lot of schools have really struggled with doing that. As an Ohio State fan, I got pretty lucky with Jim Tressel and a 1-year gap to Urban Meyer and the success that they've had. But we've seen it places like Tennessee or USC, or tying into OU, Texas. They might be the biggest one, that when you have to replace somebody who has had success for that amount of time, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And programs can go through long periods of stretches where they're kind of out in the wilderness, and OU completely avoided that, it looks like, if year 1 under Lincoln Riley is any indication. So just thought that was an interesting note to wrap up the podcast with and tie a bow on the discussion about Oklahoma football. Once again, thank you to Jack for joining the show. Always great talking to him. Please visit crimsonandcreammachine.com. Follow them on Twitter at CCMachine, and follow Jack on Twitter at JLarryShields. You can follow me on Twitter at Dubsco, that's DUBSCO. And most importantly, please subscribe to this show. There's no Twitter account, but go to Apple Podcasts, search the Two Stripes Podcast, subscribe, leave a review, leave me some feedback about what you like or don't like about the show, and you can also find it on soundcloud.com/twostripespod, or go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Colton Denning, for all the episodes of the show and some fun college football highlights that I've been cutting up. There's going to be a lot more stuff on the YouTube channel come college football season. I'm really excited for that, so keep your eyes on that as well. As far as this show goes, there's going to be another episode dropping next week, probably Monday or Tuesday. I had a really phenomenal discussion with And the Valley Shooks, Billy Gomilla. It's his second time on the show, and we previewed LSU. So going back to the SEC, talking about one of the more wild card teams, I guess, in LSU, which they always are, but new quarterback with Joe Burrow, Ed Orgeron, another year in charge in Baton Rouge. They are never dull, so had a fun discussion with Billy, and I think you're going to like it. So be on the lookout for that next week, and some fun other shows I got coming up before the start of the college football season. But until then, I want to thank you all for listening to the show. My name is Colton Denning, and this is the Two Stripes Podcast.